Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kentucky Today podcast. Kentucky Today is the news source of the Kentucky Baptist Convention. I am Lawrence Smith, the editor of Kentucky Today, and joining me as usual is Mark Maynard, our managing editor. Chip Hutchison, our content editor, is off today, but we do have a very special guest. Joining the first part of our program today, Jacob Ogan is on staff at the Commonwealth Policy Center. He wrote and we ran a piece on a drag show at Western Kentucky University that included in the audience some children. He wrote about that, and we ran it. And we want to talk to Jacob about that. Jacob, welcome, first of all. First, tell us about the Commonwealth Policy Center where you work.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Lawrence, very much for the invitation to join today. We at the Commonwealth Policy Center are, of course, very appreciative of the work over at Kentucky Today. But the Commonwealth Policy Center is a policy center based out of Frankfort, Kentucky, and we give ourselves in work unto the end of preserving life, religious liberty, marriage, and also promoting physical responsibility within the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And so this includes advocating for legislation, drafting potential legislation, lobbying with legislators, hosting candidate trainings, as well as radio programs, podcasts, and of course, in our instance today, producing columns for different Kentucky newspapers.
And the Kentucky Baptist Convention works closely with the Commonwealth Policy Center, among others, on public policy issues. You wrote an article entitled Empowerment or Exploitation, Children Present at WKU Drag Show. How'd this come to your attention?
Yeah, well, this actually originally came to our attention from one of our kind supporters, a pastor out in Owensboro, Kentucky, who reached out. He was aware that this was going on, and he saw it there in the WKU magazine, or the newspaper that the university produces. And he was frankly outraged at the scene that he saw in the pages of that magazine. And so he reached out to us, made us aware of the event, and asked us to sort of give it a platform. And so we produced a Commonwealth Minute, which is one of our radio programs that we send out across the state for different radio stations. We did that a few weeks ago, but we decided that this is a big issue. This is a big moral issue for people within the Commonwealth, for conservatives, and really just anybody who cares about the values of the Commonwealth, the values of the natural law and of common sense. And so we decided to run a column and go a little bit more in detail over what exactly is going on there at Western Kentucky University.
Without going into too much graphic detail, what kinds of things went on at this drag show?
Right. So for those of your listeners who perhaps aren't familiar with a drag show, it's essentially where grown men will get together and dress up as women. They do so in a sort of cartoonish way, over emphasizing certain feminine elements, very much painting up their faces in makeup. And frankly, it's a very sexualized display, as some of our neighboring states, such as the state of Tennessee, has recognized in formal law. It's a very inappropriate display in general, and particularly for children. So that's really what's going on there. But for our supporter and for us here at CPC, what especially outraged us was the presence of children at this display. So the WKU newspaper ran a picture of a 4-year-old girl at this drag show handing a tip to one of the performers. Georgina George, I believe, was the name of the performer, at least the stage name of the performer in question. They went ahead and named the 4-year-old girl as well, which I think is just completely inappropriate to do in a public format. But for our article, which we ran at Kentucky Today, we did not name the little girl. And just very disappointed that WKU would think that's an appropriate thing to fund, to promote, and indeed to platform. They, of course, called it a scene of empowerment, but we at CPC believe it is exploitation, the exploitation of children and likewise of taxpayer dollars to pay for such an obscene display.
That's where I'm going next. There are some larger issues at play here besides a single drag show. The fact that you said that, taxpayer dollars are going, I assume, to this, that was in your article, and the fact that, children were there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an absurdity to think that taxpayer dollars should go to support this, something that I believe the majority of Kentuckians would not be on board with. Not only the presence of a drag show on a public university campus, but especially the presence and indeed the involvement of small children at this drag show. It's absolutely ridiculous to think about.
Now, what about those who argue that parents have a right to raise their children however they want, including taking them to a drag show if they choose to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I addressed this in the article because as a conservative and as a Christian, I absolutely affirm parental rights. I believe that parents have a right and indeed an obligation before God to raise their children in accord with their own conscience. And I don't think the state should generally interfere with that. However, this right is, and as you know, Lawrence, is not an absolute right, right? There are limits on it, and indeed Kentucky law acknowledges this. Yes, you can raise your children how you see fit. You can raise your children in accord with your own conscience, but you can't abuse them. And the Kentucky Unified Juvenile Code recognizes this. I affirm the right of a parent to raise their children in accordance with their own conscience. What I don't affirm is the right of a parent to deny to their children food or shelter or clothing. And I believe that the code goes on in Kentucky law to also not only prohibit parents from depriving children of these rights, of these necessities for life, but also of exposing them to sexual scenes. Parents cannot sexually exploit their children. They cannot abuse them sexually, and that could be an emotional abuse or physical abuse. That's not allowed, and the state has to intervene with that. And in fact, the state has intervened in a neighboring state as well, the state of Tennessee, as I mentioned earlier.
And to put a wider lens on this, it's not just drag shows, but any sexualized performance would be an issue here, right?
Right, absolutely. The Tennessee legislation that addresses this, it goes beyond just drag shows. It's not trying to pin down the LGBTQ community in particular there. It's any sexualized display. So children, we don't want children at any sort of sexualized display at a strip club or something of that nature. That's absolutely unthinkable. But the state of Tennessee recognizes the history of the drag show, and indeed what it has evolved to today is frankly a sexualized scene. And it's something that, there's even legal questions as to the constitutional legitimacy of such a display in public. I'm not trying to address that in the article. That's a conversation, but it's not the conversation I'm trying to engage in at all. Rather, what I'm concerned about is the presence of children there. And that's what the Tennessee legislation is concerned about as well. Tennessee recognizes that artists do have a right to freely express themselves, but there is a problem when that expression is particularly sexual and when there are children present. And so what Tennessee did is they essentially barred drag shows from being at any sort of public venue, any place where children could be. So that could be a public park, that could be a drag queen story hour, reading of a drag queen at a public library, something of that nature, or perhaps some sort of theater performance where there's a drag show going on. And I think that's the right response, is that there's potential for children to be at these events. We don't want the events to go on. They can go on privately, but they can't go on publicly. You can't have children present for these just sexualized displays.
You mentioned Tennessee, so is this something the Kentucky General Assembly can do? I seem to recall in the past there having been proposed legislation that would do this, but so far I don't believe it's gone anywhere.
Right, absolutely. In previous legislative sessions, I believe it was actually last year, there were bills introduced very similar to what the state of Tennessee did. And so there was House Bill 402 and Senate Bill 147, I believe it was last session, and it would have barred children from being present at these events. And though the bills, they received wide support, they didn't end up passing that session, but I think that's something that we should push for in future sessions, because we can't have this sort of exploitation going on with children of the Commonwealth.
So what can Kentucky Baptists and other like-minded Christians do to help this along, to do something about this?
Right, absolutely. There is a lot you can do. You can contact your legislator. You can let them know of this event and what happened and that you're not pleased with it, that you don't want children exploited within the bounds of the Commonwealth. So if you go to the CPC website, that's commonwealthpolicycenter.org, we have a tab where you can find your legislator, you can email them, you can call them, you can let them know that these things are going on. But I think also, as Kentucky Baptists in particular, the most important thing we can do is pray. We can pray that God would raise up legislators and raise up the necessary legislation to uphold righteousness within the Commonwealth. Jesus cares greatly about the little children, and I think that we should too as citizens of the Commonwealth. Romans 13 demands that the magistrate uphold justice and righteousness and reward those who do good and punish those who do evil. And so we should just pray for our magistrates that they would uphold justice in the eyes of God and of the Commonwealth more broadly.
Jacob Ogan of the Commonwealth Policy Center, thank you so much for joining us. So we look forward to running more of your stuff in the future. You do good work.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much. I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
All right. Mark, let's turn now to a kind of a similar story that could have some national implications. The U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday hearing a case out of Maryland. The issue is whether parents can opt out of LGBT-themed book readings, classes where these books are being read. The school district in Maryland says no. The parents sued. Mark, I think that you would agree that there are some critical religious liberty and parental freedom issues at stake here.
There's no doubt. I don't know how you can ask a parent to say, to be tolerant of that and say, oh, it's okay if my child sees this. You don't want to expose them to that. And the public school system is no place to do that. And I think they're way off base here on this. And I hope the Supreme Court can come to some kind of positive decision to keep that away, because it's not about banning anything. This is, as we've spoken already, this is about children, and there is no place for that kind of learning, if you want to call it that, through this picture, to this book. That should be allowed. A parent should be able to say no in that situation.
But you raise a good point. It's not just parents being able to opt out. The question really is whether this kind of material should be read in the classroom in the first place. Some is pretty explicit.
Yeah, it does not belong there. It does not belong there. And, we're seeing that more and more in our schools. We're seeing that infiltration of that, and we have to guard against that. We have to do that to protect our children, really, from seeing this stuff and being taught about that, really. And I know one of the Supreme Court justices, I'm not sure which one it was off the top of my head, but one of them said, well, they have a choice. They can go to they don't have to go to public schools. Well, that maybe you can go to private school if you can afford it, and that's not for everybody. Everybody can't afford it, unfortunately. So I don't think that's a good answer to the problem at all, or a good solution. I know they'll discuss it, and they are looking at it and did a lot of that yesterday, but we'll see what happens. I think it's definitely something that a lot of people are watching, not just Kentucky Baptists, but I think all over the nation people are watching this decision in particular.
Well, many observers say the court seems to be leaning towards the parents, but you never know. We'll have to wait until there is a decision, probably later this summer. Interesting story that we'll keep an eye on. Mark, we ran several stories this week on the amazing response many of our churches saw during Easter. Talk about that.
Yeah, over and over, I'm hearing, of just massive attendances, really, for Easter Sunday. And while that's not completely unusual, it's still another good sign, I think, that people are looking for something, that they're searching for something, that they see church as a good thing. And as hopefully it's not we used to call them the Easter lilies. They come out in the spring one time and that's it. Hopefully the people come back to church, but I'm seeing churches look outside more than inside too. And I think a good example of that was a story we were in today on a small church, Campbellsburg Baptist, and their pastor, Wes, I can't remember his last name now. Anyway, he put together a program to look outward, to write letters, to encourage, to visit door to door. Still the best way to do it. Knock on the door. They're not going to slam the door in your face. It's not going to be a bad thing. Knock on the door, and you're going to find that people appreciate it. And what they found too, they sent letters out ahead of time. People were so appreciative of those letters, and on Easter Sunday they doubled their attendance. Now that meant they had 70 some people there. You say, oh, that's not very many. That's a lot when you only normally have 30. And I think the auditorium, he said, held about 100. So he really, felt like he was preaching to a lot of people. I think now the key is hanging on to that momentum that you've gotten from Easter. And, hopefully people liked what they heard and that they will come back. And I think, we've seen that to be true. I think there is a little momentum that comes with that comes with people maybe getting back into it. It's not, a lot of people hadn't been to church in a long time, and people are kind of funny about that. It's like when you're going to school, if you miss a class, you hate to go back to that class again because, oh, I missed that last one. I think it gets to be that way about church too. But we have we have this Sunday, the SBC has it's Baptism Sunday, so hopefully we get some good crowds from that too, build that momentum into May. And then of course, June, you have Vacation Bible Schools, a lot can happen. And I think it's just another good sign. We wrote an editorial this week about some of the good things we're seeing, the good signs we're seeing that people are looking for something. They're turning back to God. And I hope that's another good sign. And Easter was a great Sunday for a lot of churches in Kentucky.
That's great news. You also wrote a story with kind of an Easter theme about how a funeral played a role in a man's conversion story.
Yeah, a man named Wayne Lowe, and he is now the associate pastor at Creekside Baptist in Pikeville. And Wayne, most of his life, played church. He went to church, but, he said, I only kind of went for, as he said, for fire insurance. He really wasn't sold out to the Lord. He wasn't making Jesus his Lord and Savior or his master. There were other things in his life that were more important. But he would go to church, and there were several men in that church, in the churches he went to, who stayed after him, who knew, he I don't know if he's just playing church or if he's really a Christian. We're going to stay with him. We're going to pray with him. And this one man in particular, who was a worship leader as well, was just all the time talking to him. And he comes in one Sunday morning and asks, he said, "What song would you like to sing this week, Wayne?" And he said, "Well, I like that I'll Fly Away." And the man flatly told him, "You're not ready to fly away."
Yikes.
And yeah, and he said that kind of got to him. It kind of, what's he saying there? Well, anyway, some years later, this man dies, and they went to the funeral, and it was at the funeral this man's funeral that Wayne actually spoke to the church and gave his testimony as to what happened to him and how important this man was in his life, and these other men who never gave up on him. And I think we're all thankful for people that don't give up on us, whether it's our parents, if it's friends, if it's a wife or a spouse, husband, kids, whatever it is. Don't give up on people. It's never too late. Wayne's a great example. He wasn't saved till he's 55. He is now 71. And on fire for the Lord. He's leading Bible studies at that church. He is telling everybody he knows about Jesus. And he says he worked in the service industry all his life, and he drove a Little Debbie's truck. If you can imagine, that guy's pretty popular, I'd say. But he said this is just, now I'm just serving the Lord. I'm still in the service industry. I'm just serving a different master. And he's doing a great work there at Creekside. And Jason Johnson, the pastor there, is who brought him to my attention. But he's a great Eastern Kentucky fella, and just one you would really like to get to know and talk to.
What a great story, and it just shows, as you said, it's never too late. And no matter what you're doing, you can do it as unto the Lord, whether you're driving a Little Debbie truck or now an associate pastor at a church. What a great story.
Amen.
We don't want to forget the hard work that Kentucky Baptist Disaster Relief volunteers are doing. They are working literally around Kentucky and beyond. I heard today, in fact, that disaster relief volunteers have been working pretty much every week since January of this year. They've been so active. I'm sure they're exhausted, but they're really dedicated to what they're doing. Mark, talk about some of the places they're working right now.
Yeah, they have a lot of crews in central Kentucky still, in the Frankfort area. I know there's one town there called Monterey, and it's right on the Kentucky River, and it was just engulfed. I mean, every house on there was flooded. And Gina, who was the incident commander, Gina Henbaugh, talked to me last week about just how bad that was there. She'd never seen anything like it. And she did say those people were used to it. They already had their furniture out of their house because they knew that was going to be, part of the drill. But these people they're working in Woodford County, and they're working in Owen County, Franklin County, and we even have them in training people in Puerto Rico this week. So I don't know how they do it. I know they had a huge turnout, for their training session, and they probably put every one of those people to work. Ron Crow does a tremendous job of organizing, and he and Amanda keep that office moving like nobody else. And I know we appreciate the work that they do for sure. And I know Kentucky Baptists do. It's one of the front door window things you see that people see about Kentucky Baptists, I think, is our Kentucky Baptist Disaster Relief. And boy, they put it on good. They treat people so kindly, and not to mention just the hard work they do in cleaning out, mudding out houses and things like that. A terrible job, a hard job, and they do it all day long, and they do it with a smile on their face, and they give that homeowner a Bible and tell them about Jesus. I mean, they're some of my heroes of the faith of Kentucky Baptists. I'll tell you that.
I agree with that, and it's made possible because of, as we've talked about before, the cooperative program. And we should also mention they get a lot of help from the Kentucky Baptist Foundation. So those two things combined, the generosity of Kentuckians, just makes this kind of ministry possible. I wrote a piece this week about the University of Louisville settling a lawsuit with one of its former professors. His name is Alan Josephson, Dr. Alan Josephson. Back in 2017, he took part in a panel discussion at the Conservative Heritage Foundation, during which he spoke out against using surgical and chemical procedures to treat gender dysphoria in minors. In short, he opposed the transgender procedures on kids. Now, according to the Alliance Defending Freedom, which represented Josephson, he was, quote, demoted, harassed, and ultimately fired for expressing those views. He sued in federal court, and this week U of L settled with Josephson for around $1.6 million. Mark, that just sent a strong message to higher education establishment about protecting free speech rights, because this man apparently, according to his lawsuit, was demoted because he expressed what was an unpopular opinion at the university.
Right. You can't muzzle somebody from giving an opinion about what they believe in a situation like this, and especially
in a scientifically informed opinion.
Exactly, and to actually punish them for it is just it's even worse, and obviously they're paying for that, and good for the courts to rule in that favor of this former professor, because it sounds definitely like he was fired for and harassed for his statement that they didn't want out there, or they didn't want to be associated with, or whatever. I think good for the courts with how they ruled, and good for him.
Well, it was a settlement, $1.6 million, and it's important to note that he was speaking at this conference not on behalf of the university, but as a citizen, speaking for himself when he expressed these opinions. So we're glad they didn't have to go through a trial, and thanks to the work of Alliance Defending Freedom, he will receive $1.6 million in fines and legal fees and a settlement, and can go about now the rest of his life. Turning to a lighter topic, Mark, Chip wrote about a high school basketball player in Morgantown whose faith has led him through some pretty tough times for such a young kid.
Yeah, Ty Price, who is a point guard at Butler County, which is in the 3rd region. If our basketball fans in the state, he's from the 3rd region, and he was the player of the year in that region. He's a great young man. His mother passed away when he was 4, and his father passed away just about 4 years ago. I think that's what it was. And he had a brother who had cancer who passed away about 3.5 years ago. He has been through some tragic situations. I mean, just tragedy everywhere. Yet he has kept a 4-point grade point average. And he lives with his sister now, who's 18 years older. And his sister said he is in, if he's not at basketball practice, he is in the Bible. He is a strong believer, and his faith, I think, has gotten him through all this. And he's scored over 3,000 points. He's the all-time leading scorer in the third region, the biggest score they've ever had. And he also has hit more than 500 three-pointers in his career, which is ranks in the top 2 or 3 in the state all time. So he is, and he's going to UT Martin on a college basketball scholarship. So, I think we can look for great things from this young man, and hopefully he'll bring he'll put some faith foundation on that team as well. I'm not saying they need it, but I mean he's not going to hurt him any with that for sure with the way he is.
Well, unfortunately, he's leaving Kentucky to play basketball, going to play in Tennessee. But there's some news about someone else leaving Kentucky basketball that came as a shock. Travis Perry, the former Mr. Basketball in Kentucky, played at UK, now entering the transfer portal.
Yeah, big surprise. It came in the 11th hour, as we say. I think it was 2 hours left before they had to put themselves in the transfer portal. And he did that last night about 10 o'clock. And put his name out there. Now that doesn't mean he can't stay at Kentucky. He can't come back to Kentucky. He could. Doesn't look likely. There's been a lot of conjecture today on where will he go, what will he do, and everybody's talked about Western Kentucky because he's from Lyon County, and that would be Western Kentucky country. I've heard some people talk about Louisville. I've heard, and the last thing I heard though, which is this one's kind of interesting, was Ole Miss. And Ole Miss was in the hunt for him when he decided to go to Kentucky. It was between Ole Miss and Kentucky. So Ole Miss sounds like, it might be in the running for sure. And I think that would be quite interesting considering Kentucky would have to play Ole Miss or do play Ole Miss every year, and they'll have to face, they may have to face Travis in a conference game. Obviously, he left. He kind of saw the writing on the wall with how Mark Pope has been recruiting, and he's recruited great perimeter players. They've signed a freshman who's one of the tops in the nation, and he's got some guy from Florida, and he's a guy from Pitt. So I mean, Travis Perry, he can count. He's looking and he's seeing I'm not going to get to play, and I think this is a guy that scored over 5,000 points in high school. All-time leading scorer in Kentucky high school history, and. I'm wondering, what this portal's doing. That was probably his dream. I'm sure it was his dream to play for Kentucky, to go. And he worked so hard, to get to the point where he was offered a scholarship and he, makes it there. And, the portal can change everything for you, and, it used to be, okay, you go to Kentucky, you play a couple, 3 years, and maybe you can play when you're a junior and senior. Well, everything's a one year thing now. Every team is going to be different than they were the year before, almost every team. So I don't begrudge Coach Pope for getting who he can too, because he has to win, and he has to get the best players he can to win. But I do feel sorry for kids like Travis Perry and Trent Noah. Of course, he's said he's staying, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. I haven't heard I've heard some backlash a little bit about, Perry leaving, but, for the most part, I think people are wishing him well and will be cheering for him wherever he lands.
And there's portal news for U of L as well. Some good, some bad. The good news is Cason Pryor, who was injured early last season, but still became a fan favorite. He's returning, but James Scott, who was a starter for most of the season in the middle, has entered the transfer portal. That was a bit of a surprise. So, again, this transfer portal business is crazy.
It really is. I think I really like Scott. I hate that they're losing him, and it certainly hurts their depth at that position. And like you said, really, he started a lot of the year, and he's an impact player. And I know Coach Kelsey, they had a good relationship and everything, but it's not even about that anymore. It's about what can I get? Where can I go? Can I go someplace and get more? Can I get more playing time? Can I get more money? Can I get
With him, I hear he may want to play closer to home. He's from the North Carolina area, so it'd be interesting to see if he ends up at Duke or North Carolina or North Carolina State, someplace like that.
Yeah, and you also wonder, are people kind of actively recruiting these guys? Hey, we'd love for you to come to whatever state, or whatever school you are. We sure got a place for you. I mean, they're not supposed to do that, but I'm sure that's happening.
That never happens, Mark. Come on. We're going to wrap up with this. When we can, we like to talk about the Kentucky Baptist entities that are doing great work, thanks to generous giving by Kentucky Baptists through the cooperative program. We ran a piece this week from Sunrise Children's Services. And, Mark, they're really providing hope to troubled kids in Kentucky. Here are some of the things they're working on. One, they're building the Solid Rock Children's Ranch on land donated by Clark County resident Judy Singleton. There'll be 2 houses there that will house 2 large sibling groups in the foster care system so they don't have to be separated. That's great. The Woodlawn campus in Danville is being expanded to care for more boys experiencing severe emotional and behavioral problems. And they'll soon be opening the One Bridge to Hope program on the campus of the former St. Catherine College in Springfield to care for girls who've been victimized by human trafficking. Mark, Sunrise Children's Services doing a great work for Kentucky's kids.
They are amazing people with what they're doing with these kids, and I think it was this year that they surpassed 700 adoptions, which is quite an achievement as well. And they're finding a lot of these homes. A lot of Kentucky Baptist people are welcoming some of these kids in too. And I think that's what Jesus would want us to do. We're all orphans, right? when it comes down to it. And but the Lord, the Sunrise is looking to the Lord for help, and He's providing them. And isn't it great how the expansion is going for them? The things they're doing. So I'm really proud of Dale Suttles and all the people there at Sunrise, and for the work that they're doing for Kentucky children.
You're right. Thanks to the person and work of Jesus Christ, we've all been adopted, those who place their faith in Him, into the family of God.
Amen.
Well, thanks for joining us. For the latest, go to KentuckyToday.com, and for more on the Kentucky Baptist Convention, go to kybaptist.org. Lord willing, we'll see you next time on the Kentucky Today podcast.